Before the break, our school psychologist, Mr. Magdaleno, and Miss G shared very insightful support for student mental health and well-being. This is a recorded presentation. We hope you enjoy it.
On not only the symptoms that we see, but also the treatment that they're able to receive.
So we use this image as a way to kind of explain, like when we're looking at screening for students with possibly that anxiety and or depression, this is the number of students we could be addressing just in our school alone, comparatively based on our population. And this is for clinical levels of anxiety and depression. This is not just a little bit of worry, a little bit of sadness. We could have up to this many children on our campus right now suffering from high levels of anxiety and depression. So this is why we talk about this, why mental health matters.
So why does it matter? So 1 in 5 youth, and we're specifically talking about our age level of the students here on campus, have a mental health condition. But few of these students ever receive any services. And this is a combination of many factors. This is one, the students maybe not expressing it, parents not noticing those symptoms, us not being made aware of it. So because we're not being made aware and the students aren't expressing it, they don't receive the proper support that they need both from at home and in the school setting. But what studies have shown is that the earlier, the younger a student is, the younger your child is, that they receive that support, the better the outcome and the more effectiveness that there is. Because the younger we can provide them those services and give them those coping skills, the earlier they can put those in place, and the more, that's earlier prevention we can provide for them. So that we can support them and make sure that when they're at school, they're getting all the support they need, that they're focused on their academics, and then also at home, you're, as parents, being able to be equipped to give them those supports that they need to be successful at home as well. And so, what's the most important part of this is making sure that we're all on the same page, that we're all providing your children the support that they need, that we're in constant communication, which is why you are all here, because you are showing that to us, that you care about your students. So you're providing that support at home, you're that link to them, you're that link to us. Because if you communicate with us what's going on at an early age, both the school psychologist as well as the rest of the mental wellness team, we can provide that support to them.
This is some of the more like dire outcomes that we talk about a little bit too. One of the things that mental health professionals are suicide preventionists. We do not want a life of anyone expiring earlier than it should be, and there's never any way to say anything except for like suicide is extremely mentally damaging for the survivors of someone completing a suicide. So if we can address mental health early on, we can prevent suicide. Because if we're able to diagnose and get to treatment for a disorder like depression, that is treatable. It does take time. It's not overnight, but depression is treatable. There can be growth. They can get better. And then the reason why we talk about suicide often with groups like this, with mental health, is because it is one of the leading causes of death by youth. Only one more than that is accidents, car accidents specifically. But it is unfortunately very common for a reason for death in young adults, and which is why we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to address it, and more importantly, prevent it.
So, a mental disorder or mental illness is diagnosable, which is what Nicole was just talking about. That if we catch it early on and we're able to work with the students at a younger age, we're able to give them that prevention. We're able to give them those coping skills. And what is it? It affects a person's thinking, their emotional state, and their behavior. It disrupts their ability to work, if they're older, to be here at school, to carry out any activities, engage in any relationship. So what this might look like is the student doesn't want to get out of bed, they're stating they're tired all the time, you look at them and they look lethargic, it might look like laziness, like they simply don't want to do anything. It can also manifest itself in being very defiant, argumentative, refusing to do anything that they've done previously with you. And so it's just noticing your children and noticing and understanding what their typical baseline is, and then seeing if there's anything different going on, whether that's, it could look like depression or it could look like that defiance. But it's them not wanting to go to school, it's not wanting to get up, or it's wanting to constantly be out, not want to be home, not want to be around you. It's just noticing all those little symptoms and understanding your child that that's how this manifests itself in all these different parts of their life.
There's an infographic about mental health because it's becoming more common to talk about, which is why we bring up diagnoses and mental illness, because that is the most severe. Teenagers do have tiredness. They have normal, aggressive, or argumentative behavior that is age appropriate. What Mr. Magdaleno was actually talking about too specifically was that change, because there is some sense of sadness, lethargy, teenager typical behavior. It is important to talk about it because it's not shameful. It's okay to talk about it with us at school and ask us questions like, is this something I should look into? Talk with your friends, talk with your family. It's okay to talk about that because the more we remove that shame, the more able we are to recognize those changes and those symptoms. Because if we're hiding it for being shameful and being embarrassed that someone is mentally ill or maybe mentally struggling, not even necessarily diagnosedly mentally ill, we can help prevent it getting worse.
So this is kind of what I just talked about briefly. So everyday feelings, kind of what Nicole's also talking about, everyday feelings versus overwhelming feelings. So everyday feelings are things that come and go. So a student might be tired on a particular morning where they stayed up late, they were studying for a test till 1 in the morning, so the next morning they don't want to get up. But as long as they sleep that next night, then they're okay. So that's an example of an everyday feeling that just comes and goes, that it doesn't last very long. They might be tired for a day, they might be tired for a few days, they might be upset or cranky because they got an F on their test, so they come home and they're upset. They don't want to talk to you, they yell at you because you asked them about the test. That's normal. You asked them about the test, they got an F, they lashed out at you. But that's just an everyday feeling that in a few days, it passes. In comparison to something that's overwhelming, an overwhelming feeling is something that lasts a long time. So when you start to see them tired for a week at a time, where they don't want to get out of bed for a week, where throughout the summer, when they ended in May, they were getting up out of bed every day, and now the entire summer, they don't want to get out of bed. They don't want to go do anything. They don't want to go eat with family. They don't want to go hang out with friends. They just want to stay in their room. They don't want to get out of their pajamas. They just want to lay in bed all day long. That might be an overwhelming feeling. Or the opposite, also with anger, where now you ask them about that test and they're still angry 3 weeks later. They're still upset a month later about it. And they're still angry every time you bring it up. They've gone and punched a hole in their wall. They tip things over, they knock things out over where they're supposed to be. Their room's a mess, they don't want to clean it up, and it just prolongs. That's an overwhelming feeling. Something that is now, to us, is concerning because it's that student expressing that there's something going on, that they're struggling with something, and that's their way of asking for help.
We're moving into goal 2. Our next goal for this presentation is identifying the warning signs. So the things that we're talking about, those are sometimes warning signs. So those behaviors that Mr. Mike was talking about. So we're going to help be more specific about the differences between, again, more typical teenage behavior and things to be like, yes, they were rude, that was not okay, but it's not a cry for help. Sometimes it's rude and a cry for help.
So kind of, I guess I was jumping a little bit, but a little bit of the warning signs that we were looking for. So excessive fear or worry, feeling excessively sad or low. So again, just feeling sad for a prolonged period of time. Confused thinking, problem concentrating, learning, things that typically your child could do that now they're not able to do at this point in time. Extreme mood changes, very highs, very lows, where they're extremely happy, and then you see a big drop real quick where they're extremely sad. And that big fluctuation with your child. Prolonged or extended periods of strong feelings of anger or irritability, where they're just constantly angry, where there's nothing as a parent or as a staff here at school we can say or do to reduce that. They're just constantly angry. They no longer want to be with friends. They're avoiding anything social that they used to do. Changes in their sleeping habits. always feeling tired, always low energy, changes in their eating habits, such as them wanting to eat a lot more than they typically do, or not wanting to eat at all. And then when they start to think about, when they start to express, when they start to act upon wanting to contemplate suicide.
And that includes items like, for example, like we've had a couple other students too with talking about self-harm or self-injury. Self-injury or self-harm is the clinical term for cutting or using like an item that's sharp to place cuts on their body. Cutting is a warning sign, a call for help. It's very common on the arms, the forearms, and the hands. It's also very common to be completed on the legs or the thighs because those are easily hideable. So your kids you don't actually see them right away, honestly, by the time they're teenagers, because they change, because a little kid, you help them in the bathtub, you change them yourselves, and then you're helping them get dressed. So that's different. When they're teenagers, they're doing all that independently, and so you may not be able to see those warning signs sometimes. It's also been known to be previously like a girl's thing. It is not a girl's thing. There's no gender for it. It is both boys and or girls can engage in that kind of behavior, and it is a warning sign to look out for and to ask for help. So you want to add?
There was, so like tied very closely along with that is because it is happening a lot of the majority of the time on the wrist, across the wrist or the legs. With students, I know a lot of the times we can look at their attire. So a lot of times another warning sign would be if your child's always in short sleeves, and then all of a sudden they're constantly in long sleeve sweaters or long sleeve shirts. That might be something that is a little trigger and a warning sign to a parent of, is there something going on? Not that it always is, but that could be a warning sign to notice as well. If your child's always dressed how I am, in short sleeves, and now they're constantly in long sleeves, that might be a sign for you as a parent to just try to pay attention to your child, that there may be something going on as well.
Especially if it's weather inappropriate. For example, if I'm wearing this on a 120-degree day, that means I'm hiding something most often. I know a lot more teenagers like to wear hoodies when it's hot, but even then, or not wanting to go swimming with their friends because they don't want to wear bathing suits. Same reason it would expose cuts or scars. So things like that could be very, very specific warning signs. The other ones we want to talk about that are more in a different area of mental illness is difficulty perceiving reality. So teenagers have this special part of their brain where they can be a little, have fantasy and like excited, but there is a place where it becomes warning. So when they're having full hallucinations and they are seeing someone that's not in the room or talking to someone that's not there, that is a warning sign to, again, ask more questions or reach out for help. What's very common is kids starting to experiment with using substances like alcohol or vaping or using drugs to cope for whatever's bothering them. We understand that like teenagers are teenagers, there is some aspect of curiosity, but they can already begin to a phase where they can start to abuse substances and using them as a way to either hide or mask feelings of sadness or worry. One of the other things we talk about too was what's called like the physical symptoms of being in pain or having a mental health concern. If their stomach is always hurting, if they always have a headache, if they're always in pain, there's no other medical reason. For example, there is no diagnosis that something's wrong with their body, but if they are frequently complaining, my tummy hurts, my tongue don't feel good, my head hurts, my stomach hurts, that is also sometimes the body's way of responding to be in more of a mental health pain, but their body is physically feeling it as well. And it's very common to have stomach aches for students who have anxiety, because that tension they hold in their bodies, that worry causes them to be nauseous. Maybe some of them want to feel like they want to throw up because they become so excessively worried. One of the things that we mentioned before too is when they're not wanting to hang out with their friends, for a teenager, it's a really big one for us as their school psychs. If they were on the soccer team and they always hang out with their friends, they're dropping soccer, they don't want to hang out with them, that's a big change. A lot of the other ones that come up that is difficult to see warning signs for, and this is where we do ask a lot of parents for support and help, is this intense fear of weight gain and concerns with their appearance. So when they're here at school, they're already put together for the day, but if they're at home, they're weighing themselves multiple times a day. They're being very specific with what they eat. They're constantly staring at themselves in the mirror. They're poking, they're picking at scabs. Like there's a lot of intense amount of focus on their appearance or their weight or overworking out a lot. That's the other one that we get a lot too, is excessive gym use. Because there is a healthy amount of going to the gym, but for students, especially when they're younger, they want to go to the gym for 3 or 4 hours. We're like, is that necessarily good for your growing body? Maybe not. Also engaging in trying to use diet pills, over-the-counter stuff that can help with their weight loss or weight gain. Some of them also want to take like natural inhibitors, like build muscle faster. That's another thing to be concerned about because those are not age appropriate, but kids can have access to them if they just stop by like the market or something. Okay, those are the specific warning signs. Our last goal is how to support for you at home. So if you want some tips and some ideas and some strategies to help at home, we know what we do here, but these are things you can take home with you.
So this is how adults can sometimes deal with different emotions. So these are just different terms that have been come up with of how we deal with things. So one is called the dishcloth, that we just wipe away, that we just deny their feelings, we take them away, we don't really listen to them. Because with the dishcloth, what do? We just wipe down the counter. We get rid of everything that's on it. So that's one method of how parents sometimes respond to it. Another is called the sponge. So we just, like a sponge, we just take it all in. So again, we're not necessarily listening, we're not being compassionate to the student, we're just taking it all. We just take it away from them without validating or listening to our children. Another one is the soapbox. That's where we say, well, I'm the adult, you gotta listen to me. I'm the grown up, you gotta do what I said. And again, so we're not having conversation with them, we're simply talking to them. We're telling them what they have to do, what they have to feel, what they don't have to feel. So again, we're not giving the students or your children a chance to be able to express what's going on in their mind. And then the last one is a microscope, where a child will come to us and just tell us, today was a rough day, I got a 50 on my test. And so now we sit and dissect it. So instead of just understanding that it was a difficult period, they got a 50% on their math test and they're upset about it. Now we're diving into it, we're asking why and how come, and we're just drilling it. So that 2-3 minute conversation where that child just needed that support of, you got a 50%, I understand, you studied hard and I know you still failed it, we can work on this. Now it's a half-hour conversation and we're drilling the children, where now again, they don't want to communicate with us. Because all they wanted was that love and support, and instead they got somebody attacking them because they got one bad grade.
And then also the soapbox doesn't say this one specifically, but soapbox also is the act of being like, well, when I was a kid, or I had to do this, or it's not as bad as when I was younger and I had this experience. These are very common ways to just talk and respond to our children, to each other. These are like habits that we can fall into that don't, like just like you said, Magdaleno said, that don't validate feelings. It doesn't give the space for that kid to go through what they're going through. Some of the things that they complain about in the real world, the big picture, are not that big of a deal. But giving them that space to feel that big feeling, even though we both know as the adults in the room, like, honey, we've seen worse, but it's okay, I hear what you're saying, is very important. So instead of going on the soapbox and explaining how it's not that big of a deal, it's better to just give positive feedback and praise, just like he said, like you had a rough test. I know you studied. Instead of being like, why didn't you study for 3 hours, you only studied for 2. Validate discussing feelings. Validate does not mean that you agree that feeling is appropriate or okay. Validating saying like that is your feeling and that's okay for you. You may not agree with that feeling, that may not be a feeling you would have if you were in that situation. Validating just means you had that experience and that seems like you're having a hard time. You look like you're struggling through that. Respectful is hard because respectful can be very subjective, but being respectful a lot of times is just being neutral, not having large emotions, facial expressions, body language, none of this, none of like, okay, I'm sure that was great. So being mindful of how your body looks too.
And I think for our students, especially students that are middle school to high school, what they read a lot is our body language. What they look at is our facial cues, our nonverbal communication that we talk with them. So when a student or a child is coming up, and I can use me as an example, when they come up to me, if they come up to me and I'm just sitting there like this in my chair and just proceed this way, even if I'm listening, what does this show them? To them, when they walk in, it seems like they're bothering me. It seems like I don't care. I might care, and I'm listening, But if they walk in and I'm sitting like this, to them it's already the understanding of this person does not care. He does not want to listen to me. So what I typically do is I'll sit at the edge of my chair, I'll sit straight up, and I'll sit at their level. If I was standing when they walked in, I sit down with them. Wherever they're sitting, I sit with them. Because if I'm talking down to you and you're sitting there, again, it's that power. To them, they're going to interpret that as power. You're talking down to me. So it's just those small nonverbal things that we can do, that we can change, that even if we don't say anything, simply by being at their level, we're giving them the understanding that we are there for them, that we are listening.
Absolutely. Okay. So one of the strategies that I want to empower our parents to look at is when kids are young, up until teenager years, we coach them, right? We say positive things because they're walking or they're eating or something. We coach them, right? And we have that coaching mentality.
Yes.
And then in the teenager years is where the counseling aspects comes into play, where we're talking them as a counselor and not so much as a parent to kind of like what you were saying about, respecting their feelings and meeting them at where they're at, right? So I was watching something on TikTok and it was talking specifically about mental health and how do we deal with, different age group levels, and to really think about the coaching method for the younger students and counseling, parenting for our teenager years as we're looking at this. The second thing I want to bring to the school's attention, and I don't know if you guys have this already, just so you know, I'm also an administrator in a different district, but California Department of Education has a partnership with NAMI, and NAMI is having free training opportunities for advisors to start a campaign with students to have that mental awareness, and there are some trainings that are coming up. So if you'd like that information, I'd like to share that with you.
Yes, and we have a NAMI branch here, so that we can pass it on to them. If they don't already have that, we want to make sure they get that access to that.
Okay, January 17th, 18th is when the first training is gonna happen, and then February 21st,
Maybe
24th.
we can talk after.
Yes, I will share that
Okay,
information.
great, thank you.
And so, kind of touching upon a little bit about what she just spoke about, coaching and then working with our students as your children get older. It is that as a child gets older, it's us no longer talking to them, it's talking with them. Because at this age, now they're young adults. They're no longer 6 years old where we're teaching them about life. We're always going to teach them about certain parts of life, but once they reach 15, 16, 17, they've experienced certain things as well. So now we have to be able to talk with your child, not talk to them, talk with them. And that's a very big difference, is talking with versus talking to your child. Because talking with them, they are part of that conversation. They are part of that discussion. What they feel, what they think matters just as much as what we as the parents, we as the staff members, we as the adults are communicating with them.
And that is something we can model. So that's actually modeling that positive coping skills, modeling self-care, modeling healthy communication. If we're communicating with them, we are showing them how to communicate respectfully to anyone that you talk to. So we're doing that ourselves while also, like, by proxy teaching them as well, even though it's like a sneak teach. So modeling positive coping skills is important too. So when we are having stressful times as a parent at home, what are we doing to have self-care? What are we doing to deal with our stress? Are we yelling? Are we throwing things? Are we doing stuff for us when we have bills to pay, things going on, an argument with my sister? How am I managing? How am I coping? Because if I'm not managing well, how am I going to show my child how to do those things? And then we also want to teach our kids how to hold reasonable expectations for themselves. We have really high achieving students at our school. These kids work so hard. We also have an opportunity as parents, and us here we do this here at BOSA, is to teach them how to have reasonable expectations for themselves, and that human beings have limits, that it's okay to not be perfect. You don't need an A+. It's okay to work your best. That's wonderful that you're trying. So teaching them how to being responsible for me and not having too much expectations for me helps again model that to my child or to my students here at work. And showing a sense of belonging and connection. Do you want to mention that a little bit with the connection piece?
So one thing I just wanted to speak about before I do go into that is a lot of the times we try to tell our children, don't do this, don't do that. We're kind of like Mrs. G was saying, if we have a bill to pay and we throw our phone, if we yell at our spouse, they learn by what they see, not what we tell them to do. So not by our words, but by our actions. So we can tell our students all the time, hey, when you're upset, don't throw something. But if they go home and mom and dad are struggling with the bill and they see mom and dad yelling at each other and cursing each other out and throwing items and slamming doors and doing all these other things, it doesn't matter what you told your child. It doesn't matter that we told them, be nice when you're upset. Keep words to yourself, because what they saw was the complete opposite. So we have to be mindful as adults again of what we do, because it is our actions, not our words, that matter most to these students. What they see, how we react in situations, is what they are going to learn. It is what they are going to repeat. So again, it's us modeling, not just with our words, but with what we do, day in, day out, of what's going to happen. And they learn that from a very, very young age. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. My 7-year-old put me in check when she was about 5. She knows her.
She did.
I was upset about something at work. I went home and I said something, I raised my voice and I took it out on my small children. I've always told them to do the opposite. That when Papi leaves work, work is work, my home is home. I didn't do it. And it's always stuck in my mind because she called me out that day. And she told me, Papi, you were mad at me and you weren't supposed to. You told me not to do this, but you did it when you got home. Why did you get mad at me when I hadn't said anything, I hadn't done anything, but you got mad at me? You sent me to my room because you were upset. And so, one, it told me she was listening to what I've been trying to help her understand. But two, it was that reality check for me. That what we do matters as adults to these children. And we have to understand that we are that role model for them. That if we want to teach them something, we have to implement it ourselves. And so each day it is making sure, all of us as adults, that when we leave work, when we leave our place, and we go back to deal with our children, we are present there for our children. That it is fresh, clean slate, and we have to be there for them 100% compassionate, showing empathy and showing sympathy for them unconditionally. Because that's what they need from us, despite what we might see and having to deal with, whether that's bills, work, co-workers. We have to make sure that we as adults put that aside for them, to give them that voice, to give them that understanding that they have power in their voice as well, and they can express things to us. But for them to do so, we have to be there for them.
And we both have very similar precocious young daughters. Mine's 9. In that check, because I've been checked as well. Because one of the things I mentioned earlier was teaching about reasonable expectations. I'm a human. I'm not a perfect parent. I have raised my voice at my kid when I brought my work home with me, and I did feel sorry. So what I did is give myself forgiveness for being a human being. I lost my temper. I told my child, I'm sorry. This was bothering me at work, and I acted out towards you. I don't want to do that. Sometimes I make a mistake. I'm sorry. And I told that to a 6-year-old. And I didn't feel bad because I felt like I was teaching her like I made a mistake. And I think that's something that it's okay to do when we're teaching them. Again, I have reasonable expectations for myself. I'm not going to be a perfect parent every single day, every minute of every single day. So it's okay to apologize to my kid in my home, my belonging, in my household. That's one of the things of our culture. That's one of our values. When we make a mistake, we take accountability, we own up to it, fresh, clean slate, we try again. And that's promoting that aspect of resilience, because if we're promoting resilience means we can push through. We have hope for better. It can be okay. It's not going to be perfect, but having that ability to think that there is an opportunity for a positive or a more positive outcome is building resiliency in our kids. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No.
Okay. Oh, that was the last thing I want to make. The screen time, we all do it. That's when we all have bad habits. We're on our phones, we're texting people, we're social mediaing too, and then telling our kids to put their phones away. So, practice what you preach. I have to get better about it. I'm on my phone, and then my kid wants to be on my phone or on her iPad. So, being comfortable being away from your phone, if you're gonna have that value and culture in your household to get your kids off the phone, it's gonna be hard to get them to do it if you're not doing it yourself. It's also not healthy for us to be on our phones too long too, not just for kids. Routines. Do you want to go over routines?
So again, it's those boundaries, that structure, those routines of what should be consistent and how we can help them. So having that consistent, when they're younger especially, that consistent bedtime schedule. We know as they age and they get older, they reach high school, we know they're up later. We know that we start school later in the morning now. They're talking with friends, they have a lot more homework, they're studying for tests, but it's still having that reasonable expectation of what bedtime should be. When they're younger, it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. At this age, it might be 11, it might be 12. But it's still having that communication with your child of what that consistent routine of bedtime should be. The same with meals, the same with dinner. Because that's the one meal that you get with your child sometimes is at home, is dinner. Lunch, it's here, breakfast, it's here at school. But again, it's just creating that consistent family time, not so much for the food, but for them to be able to communicate about their day. Give them that opportunity for that consistent time where they can communicate what's going on in their life. Maybe it's not so much about the class, but it's how are you doing with your friends? How do you feel today? What was difficult for you today? What was one thing you learned today? And then just giving them that ability to be able to express themselves, to communicate what's going on in their day. And so creating that consistent time to do so every single day, it creates that expectation that daily they are going to be able to talk about themselves. Because as adults, what we do, we like to talk about our day. We say we're stressed, we go home, now we got to deal with this, we got to deal with that. So we don't give our children the ability or the opportunity and the time to express and talk about what's going on in their day, what struggles they might be having. Maybe not a struggle, maybe a positive. It might be good things that they want to come home and express to you. But again, creating that expectation of this is when we do those things, it gives them again that power to be able to express, to communicate, to want to talk, because they understand it's going to become a tradition of your household to talk about their feelings. The more we allow our students to talk about their feelings, the less shame there is with it, which is what we come back to at the very beginning. One of the first things we said, mental health has a stigma. It has shame associated with it, where we don't talk about it. You put it under the rug, we don't see it, it doesn't exist. Reality is, even if we shove it under the rug, it exists. That rug that was flat is now about this high. It's still under the rug, but now the rug's this tall. It's still there. We have to give our students and our children the ability to talk and communicate. How do we do that? Is by creating these expectations, letting them know their emotions, their feelings, their thoughts are okay, that they can share them with us. And then if we need to get them that support, we will provide that support. But we create that expectation to let them communicate with us. Anything else?
One of the things that Mr. Magdaleno was just talking about is like, okay, I haven't done this before in my household, so maybe how do I maybe use these tools moving forward? We have this kind of like regulate, relate, and reason component, like a theory, a way to like kind of approach. One of the things he mentioned was what they call is connect before correct. So remember how Mr. Magdaleno just said, like, I'm letting you share your feelings. I'm not correcting your feelings. I'm just connecting with you. I'm speaking with you. Recognize all emotions being natural, normal, and not a matter of choice. Especially big feelings. A lot of times kids do not choose to have such big feelings, just like us adults. Validate and label, because sometimes when this can be adults or children having a hard time identifying what does this feel, what's the word for this feeling? We're not giving it judgment. We're not sitting there and giving it a value. We're just saying, oh, this looks like you're angry, or this looks like you've been confused. This looks like you are feeling so happy right now. Helping them just, this is your feeling. And then setting limits. This one's the hardest one. For example, you're angry that I've taken away your phone. We agreed that I would take your phone away when you're trying to revise because it helps you stay focused. Shouting at me is not okay. I will keep your phone safe and you can have it back in an hour. Being very specific with kids about saying, like, for example, if they lost their phone for doing something they weren't supposed to do, being like, you can have this back in 1 day. You can have this back in an hour. You can have this back once you finish your essay. You can have this thing that you're upset about when you do this. And so being very clear about what those things would be, and that's that limit, setting very clear limits. And then also, like, when they're calm, because this is easier when they're calm, is problem solving. So next time this happens, it's something that's negative, what can we do? What are your options? What can we do instead? So having that with conversation, but that's including also, like, okay, we can't fix what just happened, but what can we do next time? This is just a poster about some mental health activities you can do with your kids, or also for yourself. One of the ones that I like to do with my child is we do a lot of the thought challenging because she's little. And so challenging means not, again, this isn't a judgment, but when we say things like, have you ever heard one of your kids say, I can't do that? That's too hard. And then I'll go, can you? What do you mean? Like, so it's challenging, it just means like, well, that's a very big thing to say. Can we look at it another way? Or what's missing? Challenging, it just means like, well, maybe we can do something and twist it into something a little bit more positive. Are there any of those that you do, Mr. Magdaleno? Oh, you like being present.
One is being present, is just being able to communicate with them, understanding where we're at. So a lot of the times, not only with my students, with my children as well, is just being present in the moment. It's helping them understand where we're at in that very moment. What is our surroundings? It's using our senses. It's using our physical eyes, our vision, our hearing, our body to understand where we're at in that moment, and just being 100% present in that moment. So I'll take my children outside and I'll ask them, what do you hear? We hear the birds down the street. What do you see? I see our backyard. I see my soccer ball. I see this. With my students here at school, what do I do a lot of times when they come in is I'll ask them to sit in the chair. And I'll ask them to put their feet on the ground. And so when I ask them to put their feet on the ground, I'll ask them, where are your feet? My feet are planted firmly on the floor. My hands are on my knees. My elbows are relaxed. My back is straight. So it's just getting them in tune with what they're feeling and with what's going on with their own body. Because a lot of the times they'll come in frazzled, they'll come in anxious, upset, angry. So it's just putting them calm in that manner, collecting their mind again a little bit to put them back in the moment that we're in. So that once we're calm, once we understand where we're at, we can then communicate. Because they can come in and they can be like this, fist clenched, upset, angry, sitting like this. And that's all okay. That just gives us an understanding of where they're at. But again, it's being present in that moment to help us understand what's going on. And then another one that I like to use a lot of times is well-being. I have a basketball hoop in my office. And well-being is if they're upset, if they're sad, if they're anxious. It's just doing those other things to help, again, calm them down a little bit to where we can communicate about their feelings. Because if they're so highly anxious, if they come in extremely upset, we're not going to be able to communicate. So I use that time to just be able to, again, recalibrate and bring us back so that we can talk about what's going on. With my own children, my son loves soccer. So we will go outside or we'll go in the living room, we'll distract ourselves and play for a few minutes when he's not able to cope with what's going on. And then after 2-3 minutes of us playing, his body's calm again. He's recentered. He's at his baseline again to then where we can talk about whatever is going on. So it's just picking a few of these and being able to implement them daily with your children, or when you see they are, when they need it, to recenter themselves again.
Just some more examples of healthy habits. Home is a safe space. We talked about these things, a few times. It's just having them labeled again, to be available, be able to be willing to listen, accepting their feelings for their feelings, not yours. Cooperative enabling is agree at realistic goals, recognize the effort, encourage them to look at themselves and have an opportunity to relax. So being able to say, like, you can do this. Remember I said, can you? Like, you can do this. But teaching them that you can do this. It might take time, it might be hard. And then promoting family membership. We actually do that a little bit here at Bolsa too. We always say, like, first you are a matador, so they're part of our family, but then that's our school family. Your home family has your own values, your own culture. So promoting that sense of you are our family. This is who we are, this is what we do, and having that aspect of belonging is really important. And just reminding them of that.
And so I tell every student that I speak to, regardless of what's going on, and that's what she had me say, I tell every single student at the end of the day, they are a matador. They are one of mine. Because they belong to this school. So no matter what's going on in their life, how difficult it might be, how upset they may be in that moment, how they may take out their anger with one of us, at the end of the day when they leave our door, they're still my matador. And that's plain and simple, that's what they are. So we will support them and we will be there for them. One other thing I want to talk about briefly is accepting their feelings. How we do this as adults is very important, because a lot of the times when our children come to us, we take it personal. So again, how Mrs. G was talking about validating their feelings, a lot of times it's difficult for us as adults because we take it personal of an attack on us, that we did something wrong, that we were not there for them. But that's not it. And it's understanding as adults that when your child is expressing their feelings, it's not an attack on us as adults. It's not an attack as parents, as staff members, it's what they're going through. And so making sure that we're there for them again unconditionally and accepting their feelings for their feelings. Not as an attack on us, not as we did something wrong, but just accepting their feelings for what it is and not taking it personal all the time.
These are just some ideas of self-care. These are the areas: physical, emotional, social, spiritual, personal, space, financial, and work. There's ways to like address it, but these are the areas. One of the ways we also do care here at Bolsa is we have what we call our spectrum of our wellness team. These are things that we use and access to help serve our students. It's not a one size fits all. That's why we have this spectrum of supports that includes us, school psychologists, school counselors. We have a wellness team through Aspire. We have a therapist through Boys and Girls Club. We partner with Project Kinship to do school and community-based like bonding and conflict resolution. We've also have had like our DGPD brings like their therapy dog sometimes and has like that component. But we try to get as many things available to help all of our kids. And this is just a little graphic that we have up at the office. And then if a kid wants some help, they're actually the one at the front office has a QR code where kids can sign up themselves to get some support. So they just click to a Google form where they can request to see the first person available or someone at some point. They can rate how severe the situation is, and they have access to that at all times. This is our just continuing how to continue to care at home. One of the things that I want to say before I'm going to pass over to Ms. Magdaleno is if a student does bring, so if they do ask for support, they go check in with someone, they will get a consent form. If your kid brings home a consent form, again, it's not an attack on the family or you. Please consider like giving them the opportunity to have free support at school. So if they do bring a consent form home and they haven't talked to you about it before, if they want you to sign it, it is again a consent. You don't have to sign it, but read it, ask questions. You can also call us if it's something that you're confused about. But if they are asking to get help, like consider signing the forms.
And I think that's the biggest thing is that understanding that even the support that we're trying to provide here at school is never an attack on parenting. It is never an attack on the home. It is simply understanding that your child has confided in us that they need support, that they, in that moment, feel that they are not able to receive out of you. So what we want to be able to provide is that support not only to them, but to the parents. Because the moment the student comes and asks us for support, or asks for a form to be sent home for school-based counseling, that school-based mental health wellness member on our team will also reach out to the parent. Will also speak to them to let them know what we would be working on, how we're gonna try to help your child, but also provide resources for that parent. Because then that parent at that moment may then confide of, we need support in this as well. I'm struggling with this. So again, the biggest aspect here is just that constant communication and that bridge between home and school. Because if we're on opposite sides of the spectrum and we're not communicating at all, we can't provide that support to that student. Because we might be able to speak about something here at school, but the moment they go home, the parent disregards it, doesn't care about it, the child's gonna be confused. But if home life and school life are united and we're talking together and working on similar things, we're gonna see a very positive outcome for that student. And so the biggest thing is just that constant communication between us.
And the last thing is when we're talking about like promoting resiliency is setting goals. So just remembering that goals for us here at school and the team here at home are, because again, I said we have a lot of really high achieving students, and making sure that we're not making negative statements about food or grades or appearance, pressure to perform perfectly, why 4.0, 4.1, comparing siblings is one of the common like mishaps we sometimes do as parents, where like, oh, your brother didn't act like this, or your cousin, that's the other cousin's another one, and having that comparison, because then students will internalize and be like, well, I'm not gonna be as good as them anyway, and then they often will shut down. So we can encourage and be positive by being simple, measurable, being specific, making them relevant to how old they are, having their goal be time-based, so setting that healthy limit or setting that healthy boundary, and that's how we promote that really, like that overall mental health and mental well-being. Because we're setting realistic, positive goals for ourselves and with our